We're learning file IO in Java. First, we'll output a file of integers, and then we'll read in that same file using a buffered writer and a buffered reader. Let's start by making our buffered writer. We'll go buffered writer bw equals new buffered writer. And then we have to pass buffered writer something called a file writer, which is just something that writes to a file. Essentially, buffered writers can write to a lot of different things. So by passing it a file writer, we're just saying we want you to write to a file. So we'll say new file writer. And then we pass the file writer the name of the file that we want it to make. And if the file already exists, then it will just overwrite that file. Let's just call it random numbers.txt. So we're making a file writer, passing that to our buffered writer, and we pass the file writer the name of our file. And right now I'm getting a whole bunch of errors because we have to import all these things. I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-O in Eclipse, and that'll import everything that I need. So now I've just imported buffered writer and file writer for us. And we still have an error on our file writer because there's a few more things we have to do before we write to a file. First off, we have to enclose this whole thing in a try-catch block because it can throw an IO exception. So we just have to write a try-catch block to handle an input-output exception. We'll put the code for the buffered writer inside of it, and then we'll catch the IO exception and print the stack trace if there is an error. So we go try to make the buffered reader. If it doesn't work, then catch our IO exception, and we'll just name it E. And then we'll go e.print stack trace. And let's also output a quick little message if an exception happens. We'll just write, oh no, something went wrong with the file outputs. And then back inside of our try block, let's close our buffered writer before we forget. If you don't close your buffered writer, then it's not even going to do the writing in the first place. So you're just going to be left wondering why your file is empty. So we'll go bw.close. And then in between making our buffered writer and closing our buffered writer, we'll put our code for writing to the random file of ints that we have. The file of random ints we'll just fill up using a for loop. First, let's just give it a header. We'll go buffered writer dot write, and then random numbers with a new line. So it'll just write that at the top of our file, and then we'll fill it with random integers just using a for loop. So if we go for int I equals 0, while I is less than 10, so we'll just give it 10 random numbers, then plus plus I. And then inside of the for loop, we'll just go buffered writer dot write, and we're going to pass it an integer, but write only takes strings, so we'll have to pass it the integer, but convert it to a string first. So we'll just use a handy little method that's good to remember called integer.toString. So we'll go integer.toString, and then in the brackets, we're just going to make our actual integer. And we'll do that using math.random. Let's just go int in brackets to convert our value to an integer since math.random makes a double. And then also in brackets, I'll just put math.random times 10 plus 1. If you can't remember how math.random works, then no worries. I have a video on that. I'll link to that in the description. So we'll go math.random times 10 plus 1, which will give us a random number between 1 and 10. And then after every number, let's just put a new line. So we'll go \n, and that should pretty much be it for our file. Let's run this, and then we'll go look at where Java saves it on the computer relative to the file that we're working with. To find the file on our computer, we just have to go to the project folder of whatever project it is that we're working in right now. So you can just type in the name of the file that you're working in, the Java file, or the name of the project, or whatever you have to do to find this project on your computer. I'm just going to type file IO because that's the name of this project that I'm working inside of. So if I go fileio.java, and I'll click to open the file location, and in here there's nothing because we're inside of the source folder right now. Where Java actually makes it when you use a buffered writer is the folder above the source folder, which is the project folder. So I'm just going to hit up to go to the parent directory, and that's where we'll find random numbers.txt. And hopefully it has everything we want. Yep, it has random numbers as the header, and then just a list of 10 random numbers. So now we're going to read in the same file that we just made. We'll read it into our program, and we'll actually just copy and paste the same code that we just wrote out for our buffered writer, because using buffered readers is really similar. We will have to change it a little bit, but just so we have the structure of it, we'll copy and paste it. So for a buffered reader, we're literally just going to change the word writer to reader. So we have buffered reader. Instead of BW, we'll go BR for buffered reader. And we'll change it again for a new buffered reader. And for file writer, we'll change it to a file reader. And I'll have to hit Control-Shift-O again just to import all this stuff. So we go Control-Shift-O, and it'll import our buffered reader and file reader. And on the first line of our file, we just used our buffered writer to write our heading. Let's just read that in. We'll read it in and store it in a string. We'll call it string heading equals br.readline. So readline is pretty self-explanatory. It just reads in the whole line of whatever is next inside of the file that we're reading from. And then let's just output that heading just so we can confirm that it actually got read into the program. So we'll just print out the heading, and then on the next line, we're going to make a string that's just going to hold each integer as it gets read in. So just for clarity, I'll just name it string int as string, because readline is going to read in a string. So even though we have an integer on each line, it's actually going to read it in as a string, and then we'll just have to convert it as we read it in. So we have string int as string. Inside of our for loop, let's just get rid of this whole bw.write. And we'll just read in the integer as a string. So we'll go int as string equals br.readline. And then we'll convert it to an integer on the next line. Let's just go int number equals integer.parseInt, which is another really handy method to remember that just takes a string and turns it into an integer. So we go integer.parseInt int as string. And I'm actually just going to output it right now, so it doesn't really matter that we converted it to an integer. But obviously, if you're reading this into a program, then there's a good chance you would want to store it as an integer since you're taking in an integer. But for our purposes, we're just going to output it. So we'll print out the integer, and we'll close our buffered reader and change our IO exception so that it says, oh no, something went wrong with the file input. And let's run this, and every time we run it now, we should get printed to the console a list of random integers, because it's just made them inside of that file, and then it reads them in from that file. And we can check out the file as well, just to make sure it's actually writing the integers to it. So we run it, and we just get our list of random integers. And every time we run this again, we'll just get a new list of random integers. And if we go open our file now, then it should just contain these ints that got generated during the last time we executed the program. So just the ones that are showing on the screen right now. And we open it, and it matches the same as the last output from the program. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll put some links in the description just to some of my longer Java videos and to some awesome Java books for anyone learning Java. Thanks for watching.